Imagine yourself in the 1970s, drawn into a psychological experiment that would change your perspective on social roles forever. This was the reality for a group of students who participated in what came to be known as the Stanford Prison Experiment, a study led by psychologist Philip Zimbardo. Zimbardo, curious about the psychological impacts of perceived power, set up a simulated prison environment in the basement of Stanford University's psychology building. Students were selected and randomly assigned roles as either prisoners or guards, with the intention of observing how these roles would influence their behavior. As the experiment commenced, it quickly became clear that the participants were taking their roles to heart. The guards, despite initially struggling with their role, began to act with an authoritarian air, enforcing arbitrary rules and punishing the prisoners for non-compliance. The prisoners, on the other hand, began to show signs of psychological distress, complying with the guards' demands and even turning on each other in an attempt to avoid punishment. What was intended to be a 2-week study on the psychology of imprisonment, however, took a dark turn. The line between simulation and reality blurred rapidly, and the experiment escalated far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The guards became increasingly abusive, and the prisoners showed signs of extreme emotional distress. Within just 6 days, the experiment had spiraled out of control. It was clear that the situation had become too real, too fast. Zimbardo made the decision to terminate the experiment prematurely due to the extreme and dehumanizing behavior exhibited by the participants. This shocking experience taught us a lot about how social roles can impact our behavior, revealing that even in a simulated environment, individuals can internalize their roles to an alarming extent. It underlined the profound influence of situational forces on our actions and the terrifying ease with which ordinary people can become agents of cruelty. The Stanford Prison Experiment, a stark reminder of how easily the line between role play and reality can blur. Now let's step back further in time to the 1920s, to a controversial experiment that delved into the conditioning of fear. The mastermind behind this was John B. Watson, a psychologist with a keen interest in behavioral conditioning. His subject? A baby named Albert. Watson exposed Albert to neutral stimuli like a white rat, pairing it with frightening stimuli such as loud noises. Over time, Albert developed a conditioned fear of the white rat, even when the loud noise was absent. This experiment, known as the Little Albert experiment, sparked controversy due to its ethical and methodological issues. The conditioning of fear in a baby without the possibility of reversing it was met with widespread criticism. Despite these criticisms, this experiment offered significant insights into how humans can develop conditioned fears, changing our understanding of fear responses. The Little Albert experiment, a controversial yet enlightening look into the conditioning of human fear. Fast forward to the 1960s, where a simple experiment would reveal shocking truths about obedience and personal responsibility. In the heart of this decade, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram set out to explore the limits of human obedience. The setup of his experiment was relatively straightforward. Participants were led to believe they were part of a study on learning and memory. The twist? They were instructed to administer electric shocks to a supposed learner whenever they made mistakes. The shocks were said to increase in intensity with each mistake, reaching levels that could potentially cause serious harm. The learner, an actor, would express distress and beg for the experiment to stop. Yet, the experimenter would insist the participant continue, stating that they were responsible for the consequences. The shocking revelation? The majority of participants obeyed. They continued to administer what they believed to be harmful shocks, despite the apparent agony of the learner. This obedience persisted even when the learner stopped responding, implying severe harm or even death. Milgram's experiment was a stark revelation of the power of authority and the lengths people could go when commanded by a perceived figure of authority. It showed us that despite our moral compass, we might act in unimaginable ways under certain circumstances. This experiment highlighted the potential dangers of unchecked obedience and the importance of personal responsibility. It forced us to question, how far would we go when ordered by an authority? Would we cross our moral boundaries? And if so, at what cost? The implications of this experiment were profound. It challenged our understanding of obedience, personal responsibility, and the power dynamics within our society. It served as a reminder of the dark corners of our psyche, corners that we often choose to ignore. Milgram's obedience experiment, a chilling exploration of obedience and the lengths we may go under perceived authority.